some of the things that they've used into Western applications through mechanisms that involve really looking at their single ingredients. So you end up having components, but you've lost the message of Ayurveda, of combinatorial language around it. So generally, that part of the industry has been successful, but it's not been successful in translating all aspects of the traditional medicine. By contrast, traditional Chinese medicine has been more resistant to fragmenting their approach, and that's been much more difficult to translate into Western medicine. It's not commonly applied, with some exceptions, some ingredients like green tea and ginseng has transferred over. So the area that I like to dedicate is an area that I decided in the 90s, early 90s, to start focusing, and that was the Amazon rainforest and the Andes to some extent. And the reason for it is that I like challenges. They had no written records from the original cultures, particularly in the Amazon. There is a little bit in Quechua for the Incan relationships, and certainly when the Spanish came, they wrote down and documented some of the traditional uses and experiences. So again, huge opportunity, but also a nice challenge. The other aspect as relates to the Amazon is that it holds 16% of the world's plant species. So there's a huge biodiversity there that one can tap into. So there's a lot that may be available to you. And I'm going to talk about three particular plants, two in the Amazon, so that's cat's claw and sangra de draga, or depending on the country, maybe sangra de draga. That's the Spanish names. It's somewhat referred to as dragon's blood. I don't like that. The reason being is that any red tree sap in any culture is called dragon's blood. It's interesting. So there's Russian plants, Chinese plants. If the tree sap is red, they call it dragon's blood. I refer to it either by the botanical names or the names used locally in the Amazon. And then maca is an example of it's a vegetable actually growing in the Andes. And one of the points I wanted to make is high biodiversity in the jungle, very low biodiversity in the Andes. It's basically at the altitude that maca has grown, which is up to around 11,800 feet. It's about one of two plants that grow in that particular climate. So it looks like the moon if you ever go up there. As it relates to cat's claw, it's named after, it's a vine, and this is particularly Carrier tomatosa. It looks like this. Pianensis has a little curly claw. It's a lot less dangerous handling it than tomatosa. And sangra de draga has this beautiful leaf structure in the tree. This is the tree here. It's all mangled and hacked and slashed. And the reason being is that in the jungle, if you've got particular needs, and we'll go through them, if you wanted to go to that tree and you whack it with your machete, get the tree sap, and you keep going based on those needs. So that tree is in a high traffic area. It's been slashed a lot. By the way, I've even tried to grow these trees in old cocaine fields, which is a really strange thing to do for a gringo scientist. And all sorts of anecdotes related to my experiences related to that. So anyway, what I'm trying to do as it relates to science is explain how these things work mechanistically, and therefore either understand or translate the traditional use, and also potentially discover new uses, because some of the traditions may not really appreciate all the potential of that particular plant. So we'll start off with cat's claw. And again, it's a vine that grows all the way up to the canopy, usually either the bark or the root. I like to use the bark because you can cut it off a couple of feet off the ground and it will re-sprout. So it's a sustainable approach. Very early on, cutting to the chase, in this particular plant, I proposed that it was an inhibitor of gene expression by blocking the transcription factor NF-kappa B, which back in was still extremely popular as a way of explaining certain anti-inflammatories, but it was a really very much a holy grail in the pharmaceutical industry inflammation is by inhibiting NF-kappa B. And we were able to show that actually within 6 weeks of my first trip into the Amazon. There is some misinformation by Western scientists, who are as guilty as the next person of adulterating the language and translation. Most people, most companies use tomatosu, and the reason for that is they say the active ingredients are these excinyl alkaloids. There is this other subspecies with a curly claw called guianensis. It doesn't have any excinyl alkaloids. It's actually slightly more potent on NF-kappa B, an inhibitor of inflammatory gene expression and an antioxidant. So we, as a culture in the West, have already started to mistranslate, and it's embedded. And as much as over the last 20 years I've tried to correct it, I've kind of given up now in terms of correcting language, unless I get a captured audience like yourself and I can dictate. So anyway, I went on to demonstrate that in lots of different settings, animal models, clinical trials, cell culture. So I'm going to revisit it in a combination. I just want to move on to Sangre de Grano. Hands up anyone who's ever heard of Sangre de Grano? No one? Great. That's exactly what I was hoping for. The reason being is that we are all acquiring new knowledge. This is fantastic. So it's a red tree sap. It's applied either topically to either cuts, insect bites. By the way, in the Amazon, the bugs are large and mean. So no wonder that tree was like slashed to death. And so it facilitates wound healing in a delightful way. It's one of the most remarkable things. But also the sap is ingested, it's swallowed for a variety of conditions, largely GI. And again, in the Amazon, the opportunity for you to have a GI infection, pretty likely. So one of my favorites. I've used it a lot. But interestingly, the FDA, so the American Food and Drug Administration, set up a class of drug classification. So there is an opportunity for botanicals to be classed as drugs, just like other prescription medicine. And this tree sap was the first and only botanical to be approved with this new law as a botanical drug, and that was done in December of 2013. It was for a very specific application. New drugs tend to be successful if you have a narrow focus, and the narrow focus was diarrhea associated with HIV or AIDS. But so here's a botanical no one in the room's ever heard of, and is the first and only botanical drug approved by the FDA. So it's still flying under the radar. How does it work? This one actually took me a long time. So I said Castor took me 6 weeks. This took me years. And I'll explain why I was so tardy. And one of the main reasons is that we found out it works on calming sensory afferent nerves. These are the nerves that are in all the barriers, so lungs, gut, skin. Basically tell the brain there is a break in the barrier, there's something wrong. I'm going to handle something locally that you need to adjust what you're doing, just in case. And so it drives a lot of the quality of life type sensations. So itch, pain, and nausea, as well as GI tract. And initially, we couldn't, when I first started, identify exactly what receptor is, and we eventually didn't get it, but we do know it's in the TRP receptor family. So at the time we started, this classification of receptors hadn't been defined. So in my defense, I was trying to explain it for a class of receptors that hadn't been discovered when I started the work. And TRP receptors can either raise the potential of these afferent nerves or lower it, so either calm them down or make them excitable. A classic example of one of the excitable components is the capsaicin receptor, otherwise known as vanilloid receptor 1. So that's an example that makes it excitatory. You could think of Sangre de Grano as an anti-capsaicin, one way of thinking of it. What we ended up doing was showing that it worked as an antioxidant. It's got a very high level of pro-anthracyanogens, particularly long oligomers. It had some fantastic anti-cancer actions, and you should try this because it would make your little microorgans shrivel up. The interesting thing about this is that it may be really potent in your assay. The reason being is that its anti-cancer aspects was by crippling the microtubules inside cells. And in fact, we went and tested it to see if it had tamoxifen in it. We didn't. But we thought, wow, this would be a good way to get tamoxifen because the Pacific yew is hard to grow. And these trees, by the way, grow 15 feet a year. The Amazon trees got to grow. So again, I think in your setting where you have 3D culture, that cell-cell interactions and how things move and sort of cytoskeleton is a big deal. So this was a fascinating aspect. There is an antiviral component in here, particularly for herpes simplex, cold sores. And then on the redox-based gene expression, it's also a great inhibitor of matrix metalloproteinases, the sort of molecular machetes that carve up collagen, cartilage. I did those studies actually in human cartilage. So here you have a botanical that's doing all sorts of crazy things. We're blocking topical aspects, we're promoting wound healing. I didn't document it. It also has some antimicrobial properties. I show that it kills Helicobacter pylori quite nicely as well. Whole range of things, but its drug approval was for diarrhea. And this is a list of some of the papers, different areas. Best to sort of go to ResearchGate and you can download the papers on ResearchGate. So this is kind of the actions that it went at. So these are the topical. I did a clinical trial in bug bites. Very difficult to do a normal clinical trial in bug bites to get volunteers to be attacked by enormous biting insects. So what I did, this is when I was a professor at LSU in New Orleans, and I did a study in Terminix pest control workers, the guys who crawl under your house. They very quickly worked out that the placebo was useless. The reason being is relief here is in about 2 minutes or less. That's the average. Very, very, very fast. And their particular, they got attacked by all sorts of things, but the number one in the southern Louisiana area is fire ants, which produce a sustained itch and pain that lasts about a week. So I published that in a dermatology journal. Bones, blisters, those kinds of things are very good. Seasonal itch here. We did a number of studies related to itch, to that, and I actually presented a few years back in Singapore at the World Itch meeting, which is, I can assure you, is the worst meeting ever to go to in your life. 3 days, every 5th word was scratched or itch. It just drove me crazy. In the jungle, they also use it for hemorrhoids. They don't really have a term for rosacea. That's really understanding that if you know the mechanism, which is a vasodilation from sensory afferents, there's an application. In terms of the dietary supplements, these particular nerves are involved in different symptoms based on whether the nerves are being activated in the upper GI tract or the lower GI tract. So you could either have the nausea up or cramping, diarrhea if you're further down. So it's been researched for all aspects, including, see the Mac PC thing, there's all kind of wacky thing. But I did a preclinical study in vomiting and retching. I always like to say both words, and if you don't know the difference, vomiting is productive, retching is not productive. And I did this in ferrets, which is the best model for, yeah, no, you got it. If you want to do motion sickness, you do the house musk shrew. Basically, you put him on a little plate that clings to the edges and you spin him around, and he just labels his little cage with vomiting. For morphine or narcotic-induced nausea and vomiting, the best model is the ferret. And in this case, we used as our control marijuana, THC. And the semaglutide was superior in the results to THC because, one, it was more effective, and two, the little ferrets weren't sitting in the corner, stoned, hypothermic, and fairly useless. So, little guys were doing great anyway. And then also healing, we've compared it to antibiotics, and it's superior, again, GI ulcers. So here you go, you've got a botanical no one in the room know about, it's been approved by the FDA as a botanical drug, has all sorts of actions, and works on a system that is calming sensory acidosis, its primary benefits, of which we currently have no therapy that works in those areas. So it's a really interesting thing as it relates. Moving quickly to maca. Maca is also a challenge. I must say that it's misunderstood in both the Peruvian or South American, we're in the Andes now, we moved out of the jungle. It's misunderstood locally in South America, certainly misunderstood in the rest of the world, and mainly because Latin American male, and I'll put the emphasis on male, scientists have been preoccupied with its libido-enhancing effects in males. It was exacerbated in the early 90s by a promotional activity run by the president of Peru, who was of Japanese extract, and he was trying to sell it to Japan, which was the #1 consumer of maca outside of Peru at the time. And he has since been caught and put in jail for terrorism and murder. So I would pose to you that Latin American despots shouldn't be used as your marketing campaign. I'm just saying. Yeah. The true applications that the Quechua and the Incan civilization used maca for was for fertility related in both genders, but particularly intrauterine growth retardation and miscarriages. For every 1,000 feet above sea level, a human baby is 100 grams small. So in the US, I like to talk about Denver, it's about 5,000 feet above sea level. So that's a significant reduction in birth weight. But in the Andes, it's around 11,000 feet, where you're potentially talking considerable reductions in birth weight and your own compromising fertility. So just as an anecdote, when the Spanish conquistador bumped off the Incas, named Pizarro, he couldn't get his horses and his pigs to reproduce in the Andes when he was taking over the countryside. And he actually asked the Incas, how do you get your llamas, biscayenas, alpacas to grow? And they said, well, we eat the maca just like we do. He was so enamored with maca that he exported it back to Spain. First shipment was 450 tons. And it was 21 years prior to him importing another famous Incan crop named the potato. So he was much more enamored with maca than potato. Over the course of the centuries, Europe forgot about it, didn't even know it existed, and it's got reinvented in the last 15, 20 years. But if you look at growth restriction and miscarriages, the sort of male libido aspect doesn't fit into that. Testosterone is not going to resolve growth restriction. And in fact, it's been tested for all sorts of classic sort of sex hormone related activities, and it fails in all of them. And so we knew it worked. We knew it worked for growth restriction. By the way, one of the things I was focused in is there's a gene involved in growth restriction that's turned off by hypoxia and at high altitude. This is the area of my focus. And that gene was IGF-1. So I proposed, and one of the reasons why I was focused on fetal growth restriction, because I was a professor of pediatrics at the time, and I've made a number of breakthroughs in terms of our understanding of fetal growth restriction. At that time, most people thought it was vascular insufficiency, and I was switching into an immune compromise and reduction of growth factors. So I proposed that it raised IGF-1, but the way I went about it was confusing to most people because I decided to test it in fish. rainbow trout fish farming, which everyone says, why would you do that? And the reason being is that IGF-1 is one of the dominant components for driving fish growth. And I can get a lot of fish very, very quickly. And we were spectacularly effective in growing fish growth. We got a 300% in the size of these baby trout. We actually had a 55% increase in the feed to conversion ratio of fish. So how much food you throw in the tank to how much protein of fish you get back. That is classic anabolic effects. When you make it more efficient to convert food into substrate, it's going to fish. And then I crunched all the numbers and I found out that feeding an expensive food to something else that's going to become a food wasn't economically viable. So I abandoned fish farming, my burdening career of feeding the world for fish farming collapsed upon me. And I decided to test the theory that erases IGF-1 gene expression in another model where I could be more commercially successful. And I went from fish farming to arthritis. Again, you've got to follow my weird brain sometimes. So what I did was I tested it in human cartilage, surgical specimens, and looked for IGF gene expression and translation. And then I started to look at it as a component for treating arthritis and joint health with the NF-kappa B inhibitor, which was the Catskill. So I was combining cultures, Incan, Amazonian. And we knew that this was a potentially big area because the world struggles to have something that truly repairs joints. And that's sort of highlighted here. So that was the idea. If we could do it in joints, we'd be much better off. And so this is the rationale in that in a healthy piece of cartilage, consider it like a brick wall. The bricks are the equivalent of glucose. That's what a brick is. And the mortar, with all the going around the bricks, is actually type 2 collagen. That's in essence what cartilage is. And then chondroitin is about 150 bricks, and that's cartilage. That's chondroitin. And with inflammation, what you do is you have a system where you're getting processes with the brick walls being knocked down. What we've done as a nutraceutical industry is we're focused on ingesting bricks, swallowing glucose. And I would pose to you that if you just ingest bricks, you're not going to get a brick wall. What you need to do is turn off this destructive process and activate a bricklayer. Hire a bricklayer to put the bricks in the wall. If you just swallow bricks, you get a pile of bricks. And we went ahead and did this. So what we did was, the other data is actually the marker. We showed we raised the IGF-1 gene. This is looking at the amount of IGF-1 protein. It went down with inflammation, as you would expect. So here we treated cartilage with interleukin-1, gave it back, we raised it with either the NF-kappa B inhibitor or the marker. So it's Catskill, marker, and the combination puts it back to normal. And we were able to prevent that loss of glucosamine from cartilage tissue. So this ended up marrying two different cultures, and it ended up being successful in the joint space. We did a clinical trial, and we ended up having a 7-day claim, which actually changed all of the joint health culture. Until then, it was only 2 months. So this approach of translating these traditional medicines actually changed the way that we market joint health products. Virtually all of them you see now have a 7-day claim or a 5-day claim. Next they'll be trying to do it even sooner, but that was a result of that. And then we decided to make it even better. And I'm not going to go into all the economics, but I ended up taking Catskill marker, then I added Boswellia serrata because I know it's another transcription inhibitor. Then we added leucine, which was unusual for the joint health space, but mainly used in the muscle space as an anabolic factor. So in this design, I've got 2 things that are working anabolically and 2 that are anti-inflammatory, and we developed a product related to that. We looked at it in 3 different ways, and again, I'm taking traditional medicines from cultures, some of them don't even have a written language, and going heavy science. We did epigenomics in terms of gene expression, we did metabolomics, and then we did a clinical trial. So very quickly, this is the gene expression. This is the measure of NF-kappa B activity. It goes up if you hit the chondrocytes with IL-1. Give the product, its commercial name is Flexure, totally prevented NF-kappa B activation. This is one of the genes that are like the sledgehammers knocking the bricks out of the wall, breaking down the matrix. That's MMP9. That's the activity of IL-1, basically eliminated it with Flexure. So here we're showing some of the genes, just being succinct. This is looking at the repair side. So that was the damage side. If you go to the repair side, we also did what we achieved. And here's 100% level. And this is like, the red is with interleukin 1, and then the purpley blue is interleukin 1 plus the Flexure. And we see that the gene that was responsible for making bricks, which is ACAN, went down to 37% with interleukin 1, and in fact went above baseline with the Flexure, even though IL-1 is still there. So we're turning on repair. And then we did type 2 collagen, and again, that gets suppressed during inflammation. You don't have repair when you have ongoing inflammation. Even though you have that signal, you can overcome it with this combination of traditional medicine. My colleague in the back, if you could just switch your little camera off now, and we'll turn it back on in a second. I looked at the metabolomics. The reason being is I